All right, hello and welcome to the fourth in this series of tutorials on using SketchUp to design dollar store foam RC airframes. If you haven't already gone through the other three tutorials, go ahead and stop this, take the time to go through it. Or if at some point you're going through this and you get confused about any of the keyboard shortcuts or features that I'm talking about, stop and go back to those other three, because I'm basically going to be building on all the stuff that we did in those others. All right, so in this one we're going to focus on how we can bring in reference images to our project here and use them to start building out our geometry. So first off, I'm in my default view here, and I'm going to select our person and delete them, and I'm going to switch my camera to parallel projection. Then using the keyboard shortcut, I'm going to the top view with Command or Control 1. And it even says top right there, so I know that's where I am. And I'm going to take my rectangle tool here, and I'm going to create a piece of geometry that's just going to basically be my kind of virtual tracing pattern. All right. And when I have it created, I can see it's got that kind of blue look instead of white. So I'm going to right-click and choose Reverse Faces, so I have the white side facing up. And to bring in our images, I have this image that I located through a Google search. This is a Piper Cub, and it's actually a fairly large pausing. It's rather fairly large resolution image. I'm actually only seeing part of it here. If I stretch it up, you can see it's quite large. And we're going to use that as our tracing image, or our kind of blueprint to go by. So how do we get that into SketchUp, into something that we can use? Well, we're going to do that with a texture. And to do that, we're going to have to open up a different window that we haven't used before, and it's going to be the Materials window. When you open the Materials window, the icon that you want to select across the top, which is sort of the category, these are just colors, is the one that looks like a brick, and it's the texture palette. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new texture down here in the empty space. And we're going to do that by just right-clicking, choosing New Texture, and we're going to choose our reference image. And it has some default sizes here. We're just going to go with the defaults that appear, because we're going to make an adjustment once we get it in here. All right, so now we have our new texture, and then to apply it to our geometry, we're going to just drag it and drop it. Now, as you can see, it's not quite aligning the way we would need it to be able to see all three views. And we're going to adjust that. But since we're not using the materials palette anymore, I'm going to go ahead and close it. And to make some adjustments to our texture position, what we can do is just right-click over the geometry, and under Texture, there's Position. And once you've selected that, you'll notice that a lot of things have changed in the interface. So what we're seeing now is the tiling, or the repeating pattern of our texture. And we have 4 different control handles. We're actually only going to be using these bottom 2 control handles today. And there are the Move and the Scale handles, which can also be used to rotate. But if I zoom out a little bit, you can see we have this kind of Christmas wrapping paper pattern happening here. And I can see that within the boundaries of these 4 handles, I have a single tile, or a single instance of our 3 different views here. And what I want to do is move them so that they're lined up to our geometry over here. So to do that, I'm going to grab the red handle, and when I click and drag, you can see that's how you can move your texture on your geometry. And it will snap to my edge there. So there, it's snapped into there. And now, notice I get a little bit of a repeat happening up here and some strangeness happening over here. It's a little too close to the edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale my texture down a little bit, and I do that with the green handle. If I click and drag, you can see it'll actually snap. You can make it much larger if you need to, but we want it to snap down to that edge there. All right, so now we've got it so it's fitting perfectly in there, except we do have the kind of nose-on view repeating a little bit in the top of our geometry, which is fine. We're basically done with our texture adjustments at this point, and to accept those changes, I just hit Enter on the keyboard. And to get rid of this extra repeating area up here, I'm just going to select that edge, take my move tool, and move that edge down a little bit until we're only seeing one set of reference images. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start tracing some geometry onto this, and to do that we want to make sure that we don't start cutting up or mangling the geometry that's holding our reference image. We want to make sure it's safe. So to do that, I'm going to triple click to select the geometry and all of its edges, and we're going to turn it into a group. So I'm just going to right click, choose make group, and now if we start drawing lines, they're not going to actually interfere with this kind of virtual card that's holding our image here. Alright, so we're going to start with the side view of the fuselage. I'm going to zoom in with the mouse wheel, and we're going to start using our pencil tool to start laying down some points in our geometry. So I'm just going to pick a spot up here with the engine cowling to start, and each time I click I'm basically laying down another point. And I'm going to zoom in with the mouse wheel while I'm laying down points to kind of get a better feel and better control over where I'm going to lay down each of these segments. And I'm just going to take it out to basically where the rudder kind of intersects the vertical stabilizer there. And we'll come up. And I want to kind of line it along with the top of this edge, so I'm just going to say it's going to go to about there. And I'm going to skip this little angle up here and just bring this straight to the root of the wing. And then we got a little bit of a sweep upwards to the front of the windshield, and then back down here and closing it out. All right, so now we have our general boundaries for our geometry, and we've got one side of the fuselage. But again, this is completely flat, and what I'm going to do is we're going to rotate our view here to take a look at something, because you'll notice that it's also on the exact same plane as my reference material, which causes this intersection error, which can be confusing when you're trying to move things around and change them. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of float this geometry up above our reference geometry just a bit. So I'm going to select it, take my move tool, and move it up along the blue axis just a little bit, so that now there it sits above our reference material and they're not intersecting each other. I'm going to switch back to my top view with Command or Control 1. And we know that this isn't a completely flat-sided plane. You can see in the top view there's a taper back here by the tail, and the nose kind of tapers a little bit up front as well. So let's go ahead and put in some creases that will allow us to kind of create that. And let's see here, we're going to need one that basically goes from the back root of the wing. So I'm going to take my pencil tool, and about where I started that upward sweep, I'm basically just going to bring a crease or a line segment straight down. And then let's see here, looking up front, it's relatively straight on for the most part. Let's go up here, and I'm just going to bring this one down to here. And I think I may just bring this straight down to there, so that now we've got some panels that we can sort of fold inward. All right, and right now they're still just completely flat if I rotate around. Oh, and I also notice that my faces are reversed, so let me triple click and reverse faces, so we've got the white side facing up. All right, so that gets us close to what we want. Excuse my squeaky chair. Now next, what we're going to want to do is kind of flip this so that we're looking at it, instead of laying flat, we want to kind of flip it 90 degrees. So it's standing upright. That way we can line it up with the top view and start bringing in that fold over here. So I'm going to triple click to select it all, and I'm going to right click and choose Make Component. And I'm doing that because we're going to need two sides of a plane. So with components we can basically make one, and any changes that we make will get transferred to the others. So I'm going to make a component, and I'm just going to call it fuse side. All right, and I'm going to switch to a view where I'm basically going to be looking down the nose of it towards the tail. Let's see here, is it the bottom, front, back? Nope, there we go. Left view looks like it's the one that is looking down there, and I can double check that by just orbiting up just a little bit. Yep, so I'm looking down that way. So now I'm on the left view. It'll make it easier for me to make sure that I'm rotating on the right axis. So I'm going to pick a point here at the end, click once to set my rotation point, click again to set my handle, and then when I click the third time, I will have rotated it so it's now standing upwards. All right. But now, if I'm looking down at it from above, it's going this way. We want it to go this way. So I'm going to use this view to take it and rotate it so it's now pointing the right direction. And I'm going to move it to kind of line it up with my fuselage. All right, and if I remember correctly, right about here should be the root of the wing in this panel. So let me orbit to the side a little bit and see. Oh, that's a little bit confusing. So let's move this vertically up above our reference. There we go. So I'm going to orbit around and see if I've got that relatively close. I need to move it towards the tail a little bit. So right about there looks pretty good. I'll switch back to my top view. All right. And I'm going to move this closer to the edge of the fuselage as I'm seeing it here. All right, so now I'm ready to bring this tail section over. So to do that, first we're going to swing around to the back here. And now we're going to do something that we didn't do before. We're going to edit a component without exploding it or breaking it back apart. And to do that, if I double click on a component, you'll notice the rest of the model gets hazed out. So it's showing this is the only thing that we're focusing on. So this way I don't have to keep kind of breaking apart my component and then making it and remaking it. So I'm going to move it along the blue axis a little bit and then hit escape on the keyboard to drop back out of that component. And I'm going to switch to my top view to see, I need to move it a little bit more. So I'm going to double click into my component, take the move tool, move it along the blue axis a little bit more, switch back to the top view, and with nothing selected, hit escape. Oh, I went a little too far. And this is all just kind of an eyeballing it type of technique that I use. So I'm going to move it back just, oops, undo. Move it back along the blue axis just a hair. All right, that should be good. Switching back to the top view, spacebar to deselect, and there we go. Now we have this back side of the fuselage that's going back at an angle. All right, good. Now, but we need two sides of a fuselage, and we don't want to model the whole thing over again. So what I'm going to do is take this component, I'm going to use my move tool, and I'm going to duplicate it while moving it. And again, that's holding down the Alt key as I click and drag along the red axis. And you can see that it creates a duplicate in one motion. All right, but as we're looking at this duplicate, it's tapering, or the tail is kind of curving in the same direction as before. We want it to flip around the other way. Well, the easiest thing to do is actually kind of, it's incredibly logical once you've seen it done, but it can sometimes cause people some trouble when they're first learning SketchUp. So what I want to do is basically mirror this. Well, as far as I know, there's no mirror function in SketchUp. However, we can take the scale, and if we scale, and as I start to scale this, I want you to watch which direction I'm scaling it and see what it's showing down here in the status area. Because I'm basically going to scale it in the negative one time. So I've basically just pushed all the measurements to be the flip-flop of each other using the scale. So now I still have the external panel facing the right way, And anything that I do to this one will be transferred to that one, but it's going to be the mirror image of it. So the easy way to mirror something is to just do the -1 scale across a particular axis, and then you've got a mirror copy of it. And again, just to show you one of the cool things about components, and I'm going to undo this, but anything that you do to one, you can see it's getting transferred right across to the other one automatically. All right, so I'm just going to do Control or Command Z. There. So now we have our two halves. Next thing I need to do is switch to my top view, and I'm going to take this panel, I'm going to slide it over with the Move tool right along the red axis until it lines right about up with my reference line for that side of the fuselage. All right, so now I've got those two lined up. Now, we're going to stitch these two halves together, but before I do that, I don't really need this reference material right now. I'm going to need it again later, but I don't want to have it cluttering my view. So what I'm going to do is, with it selected, I'm going to right-click and choose Hide. So now it's still here in the file, but it's not going to be cluttering my viewpoint. All right, so now we're going to stitch together these two halves to make our fuselage. I'm going to do that again with our pencil tool here. And I'm just going to start back here at the tail, and I'm basically going to create a new set of geometry that traces right along the faces that make up those two. And again, I've got my light blue here, so let me switch and reverse the faces there. So, all right, we got our external side there. And I'm just going to go along and basically just retrace these points. And you'll see that once you get enough edges in, SketchUp will basically fill in your surface for you. Okay, so there's our top half stitched together, and I'm going to rotate around here and going to do the same coming from the bottom half. Oops, get my view lined up there. There we go. I'm not sure if that's got my... Yep, okay, so its faces were reversed. All right, now I fixed it. Now you'll notice that I don't have a crease running down to this edge, but you can see that there is an actual corner right there. So I'm going to need to trace that corner when I put this bottom panel in. So right there, and it'll snap to it. There we go. Whoops. I'm going to do that one backwards. Let's try it again. There, to there, to there. All right. And once we start kind of developing our model and kind of seeing how it works, we may actually end up removing some of these panels in our final plans. One of the things you'll notice about most of the swappables is this kind of lower chin section of the fuselage. It's usually left open to make it easy to get the power pod in there and be able to move it around and access things, as well as to let some airflow in and cool it. But for our tutorial here, this is good practice to kind of get an idea of how to kind of sit down and kind of build up a model from scratch. All right, so there we have our fuselage. All right, now I'm going to pause this particular tutorial, and we're going to pick up again with our tail section. All right, so now that we've got our fuselage made, let's go ahead and bring back our reference images. And let's see here, it's under Edit, Unhide, All. All right, so there's our reference image. I'm going to switch to my top view with Command or Control 1. And I'm going to go ahead and select the fuselage that we've built and turn it into a component as well. So with all the parts selected, both the sides and the top and bottom that I've added, I'm going to right click and choose Make Component and just call it Fuse. Okay, now you'll notice that I now have a component with components inside of it, because the fuselage sides are also still components. and that can still be handy. You can nest components. All right, so for now I'm going to hide this. There we go, hide. And switch back to my top view. And we're going to make our horizontal stabilizer and elevator geometry here. So I'm going to again start with my pencil tool and pick a point midline here to start up. And I'm just going to start tracing along here. And in some places you probably could use the arc tool, but one thing that you'll notice is that specifically the curves that make up this tail, they're not really symmetrical, and it can give you a tail that doesn't look like your reference image, basically. It'll have a nice symmetrical curve, but in reality, the tail doesn't have a symmetrical curve. It's got a bit of an obtuse or acute curve here and there. All right, and I'm going to pull that down and then connect it. There we go. Again, I'm going to reverse my faces here. So there we've got our outline. And I'm going to triple click on it and make a component. I'll call it horizontal stab. Oops, a little misspelling there, but oh well. And I'm going to bring it up above my reference material again, right up on that blue axis a little bit. And I'm going to duplicate it as well, just like we did before. So with move selected, hold down Alt, click and drag. And again, I'm going to mirror it by taking my scale and scaling it so it's -1 right across the board. Switch back to move and my top view. And I'm going to use this corner here to snap it to the other. You can see there's even a little bit of a distortion and asymmetry in my reference image as well. So it's not quite perfect, but again, it's a foam model. All right, so now we've got our horizontal stabilizer. I'm going to move it up a little bit. And we're going to also draw our rudder section here, roughly. Now this does have some symmetrical curves here, so I am going to use the arch tool in a couple places. And I'm just going to say I'm going to start here, come here, and I'm actually going to rough it in with some straight lines that basically will just come up to some curves. And then I'm going to add the curves in once I'm close to that. There we go. Let me flip this. Right, and now I'm going to use the arc tool to put these nice little curves on here instead of drawing a bunch of straight segments. There, and pull that up. That's pretty good. From here to here, kind of pull that out. And then I don't need these segments once I've put in those arches. All right. Again, triple clicking to select. I'm going to move it above my reference material. All right, so now let's take a look at the top view again. And we're going to now do the same thing with our wing. Now our wing is mostly rectangular, so I'm just going to grab a rectangle, pick a point here along the center line, and rough out the bulk of the wing there. I'm going to right click and reverse faces. And now I'm going to take my pencil tool and start bringing out some of these edges. And I think you can see how this has got a sweeping curve back here, but a tighter curve up front. I'm still going to try that same technique of kind of trying to find the places where I can bring the arc tool into play. I'm going to use an inference line to make sure this comes right up in line with there. All right, and I'm going to orbit just a little bit so I can move that above my reference material again. And then switch back to my top view. All right, and I'm going to use my arc tool and see if I can smooth this out a little bit. hopefully it won't look too weird. See if these curves play nicely. That's pretty close. And from here to here. Oh, that one wants to, oh, there we go. All right, so now let me get rid of these extra straight segments. All right. And there we've got our basic wing. I don't need this one now. And I'm going to triple click and then right click to make it a component. Let's call it wing for now. And again, I'm going to use my move, and I'm going to hold down Alt on the keyboard to duplicate it along the red axis. And I'm going to use my scale to do the -1. And if I hold down Alt, it'll actually do it across the center point. And I'm looking at my scale down there in the corner until it says -1. There we go. So we've got our mirrored version of it. And I'm going to use move again, M on the keyboard, to grab that corner and snap it. All right. So now we're ready to kind of pull things together. We've got our basic geometry in here. Let's go up under Edit, Unhide. We're going to unhide our fuselage. And let's line some things up. So if I select the wing and the other wing, and then use the move tool to pull it up along there. I'm just going to let it sit right about there. And looking at the side view, our horizontal stabilizer goes about midway through the fuselage, a little bit towards the high end. So I'm going to move that down. Oops. Move it down along the blue axis a little bit, about there. And I'm going to need to rotate my vertical stabilizer here, so let me first group it. Triple clicking to select it all, right click, make group. And I want to switch to a view where I'm looking down the length of it like I was the fuselage, and I think that was the left view, sure enough. Using my rotate tool here, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees so it's pointing vertical. Tap the spacebar so I'm not selecting anything, and I'm going to hold down the middle scroll wheel to orbit, and I need to rotate it. So let's go to the top view here, grab my rotate again. I'm going to rotate it from this point so it's pointing down the length of the fuselage, and I'm going to orbit around to see it. Yep, there it is. I'm going to take the move tool, and I'm going to use this little crook of the tail as my reference point to drag it over to there, and I'm going to come in and adjust it a little bit. There's the midpoint. And let's see, I think it's sticking out the back a little bit. Oh, it sure is. Let me find the right view here. There we go. I'm going to slide that into the fuselage a little bit better. That's pretty close. And we now have a good starting set of geometry to start modeling our plane. Our plane, for the most part, the proportions are here now. And really, that's kind of what this particular set of tasks that we've done in this tutorial is focused on. It's getting the proportions of the overall plane in there. And again, this might be a little bit different if we were designing a plane completely from scratch, not going off of reference material. And in this case, we're trying to make something that's a scale model for the most part. What we're going to do in any of the preceding tutorials is we're going to take this base geometry and actually start putting in places where, figuring out where we're going to need to put folds. We're going to give it some depth and thickness, and we're going to size this and scale it so that we can fit a swappable power pod into the front of this. All right, but that's it for this one.